It gives me a great deal of pleasure to extend to each of you a very cordial and warm welcome to our activities and special service tonight. Now, if you feel anything like I feel tonight, you're a little bit nervous. But we want you to relax. I promise you I'm going to do my best to relax. They told us this was to be an informal service. I don't really believe it, but anyway, it's supposed to be informal. And so here we are on what I consider a momentous occasion. And we appreciate your coming and your presence. We notice in the congregation a host of friends and special guests. We recognize Dr. Paul Rees, Byron and Eileen Crouse. We see Dr. Taylor back there and a host of the family, members of the church, friends of the church, and friends in the community. We deeply appreciate your coming and sharing this evening with us as we honor a couple that all of us very deeply and dearly love. Just a word or two of announcements we feel are important. The Sunday morning worship service tomorrow morning will begin at 10:40. This is a little unusual as far as the regular scheduled hour of worship. Please remember that, 10:40. Please note the early starting time. And there are several very special items on this program. Dr. Paul S. Rees, highly esteemed friend of the McCluskeys, will deliver the message. And also there will be a special presentation made during this service. Tomorrow afternoon, between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m., the McCluskeys will receive their friends in the church fellowship hall, and everyone is invited to share this time with them. I would caution you to please remember to set your clocks up 1 hour tonight after this service to begin daylight saving time. If you don't do this, you'll be an hour late for the morning service tomorrow, and we guarantee that if you miss any of it, you'll be sorry that you did. You might need to come early to get a seat. We are especially honored to have with us Honorable Tom Sawyer, member of the North Carolina House of Representatives, and he has a special item of interest to present to us at this time. Honorable Sawyer.
First, I want to express my appreciation for being asked to participate in this special occasion honoring your minister. And I want to read to you a joint House resolution, joint with the House and Senate, which is being sponsored by all 7 members of the Guilford County delegation to the House of Representatives and the 3 senators from Guilford County. I read the following. A joint resolution honoring the 40 years of faithful service of the Reverend Robert I. McCluskey upon the anniversary of his becoming pastor of the Christ Wesleyan Church of Greensboro, North Carolina. Whereas Robert I. McCluskey became pastor of the First Pilgrim Church, now being Christ Wesleyan Church of Greensboro, North Carolina, on May 13, 1933. And whereas Robert I. McCluskey not only has served his church continuously, unstintingly, and unselfishly over a period of 40 years, but he has been a personal minister to hundreds of people throughout the city of Greensboro and Guilford County. And whereas Robert I. McCluskey has, in addition to his ministry, to his own church, carried on radio ministry to thousands of souls each Sunday morning from 1941 to 1956. And further extended his ministry to child evangelism at the Greensboro Community Center, and gave leadership, counsel, and spiritual guidance to Youth for Christ, as well as granting his loving care to the bereaved and to the sick in hospitals. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the House of Representatives, the Senate concurring, the General Assembly takes this occasion of the 40th anniversary of the ministry of Robert I. McCluskey to honor the many years of service he has given to the good people of his community and state, and to commend him for his selfless service and for touching the lives of so many in their hour of need and dependence upon him. A copy of this resolution shall be sent to Christ Wesleyan Church. This resolution shall be effective upon ratification. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, and I'm sure that all of us concur that this is action well taken. We speak from a bias, and we're not ashamed of that bias. Thank you so much for that and for your presence with us. The work that has gone into the anniversary celebration has not been carried on by one individual. There has been a dedicated corps of people who have given of themselves selflessly. We could not begin to list them all here. But it is my pleasure to introduce to you our honorary chairman of the 40th Anniversary Committee, Mr. Curtis Holland.
At the request of a grateful congregation, we are pleased to present this annual celebration honoring Reverend and Mrs. R.R. McCluskey for the 40 years of their faithful pastoral service to our church. Will the honorees please come forward?
Thank you so much. It won't bite you. You are there in the Ohio farm dirt, there in the Greensboro streets, on the Bible school campuses, in the Caribbean pulpits, the radio stations, at the makeshifts, mourners' benches, wherever a man had a need. But we couldn't share the excitement of all those years with you, Robert Irving McCluskey. No one person could. And so tonight, we're asking you to permit us to relive with you some of the memorable occasions that have spanned your 67 years and the 40 years you have given to us as pastor of this church. You are born a Buckeye, the third of 7 children of Harry Leighton McCluskey, on September 4th, 1905, near Grinfield, Ohio. Your father is an Ohio dirt farmer, as you yourself describe him later. He is 32 years old at the time. Your mother is Carrie Bell Tudor McCluskey, a strong woman who will bear 4 sons and 3 daughters, a properly sized family for a farm couple. And I wondered when you'd wake up.
That's Sam.
We're relaxed. Everything's all right. Harry McCluskey is an Irishman with an Irish reputation. He takes his family to a small Methodist church where he surprises the community by getting a case of old-fashioned Methodist religion when you are too young to know what it's all about. You are only 4, Bob, when your father attends the Leesburg, Ohio camp meeting. There he hears the Reverend Winifred L. Cox of North Carolina praise the virtues of the Greensboro Bible and Literary School of which he is president and founder. Your father dreams of becoming a preacher himself. And so, at the age 36, your father sells his farm and stock and moves with his family to Greensboro, where he buys a frame house way out in the country at what is now 902 Haywood Street. Although the family consists of 4 children by now, the converted Irishman becomes a ministerial student at Greensboro Bible and Literary School. So sparsely populated is the neighborhood that he passes only 1 or 2 neighboring houses in his 2-block walk to the campus. Your father developed strong religious beliefs and strong religious habits. On Sundays, he leads his young family to services at the International Holiness Union and Prayer League Church on the Bible School campus. The services frequently last until 11 o'clock at night, and you develop an early distaste for long church services. You and your brothers and sisters do what, Bob? You remember? During those church services? You sleep. In later years, when you are in the pulpit, you remember those services. You decide to spare your congregation such experiences, and you often chide other preachers for holding their Sunday morning audiences past noon, even his associates. Before your father can finish his ministerial training, although not at all before he preaches in jail services and prayer meetings, your sisters Alice and Esther and your brother Bill are born. They complete the McCluskey clan, shown in this photograph of the early 1920s. You, your mother, your father, your sisters Edna, Alice, and Esther, and your brothers Neil, Harold Jr., and Charles. The increase in family prompts your father to drop out of school. He works in a furniture factory and later becomes a building contractor. You and your brother Charles, who has always been known as Bill, were close from the beginning. In fact, if you remember, shortly after Bill was born, you offer your mother a deal, don't you? You remember that deal? Tell us what it was. He offered to buy him. You offer your mother a nickel if you can have Bill for your very own.
He was worth it.
Bill, he says you're worth a nickel. Although that was a serious offer, Bob, you later become known as a great practical joker. When your mother keeps 4 Bible school boys in your home in addition to her own family, such future preachers as Percy Trueblood and singers as Clarence Winslow become additional victims of your trickery. At one point, remember, you make a miniature casket and send it to an aunt who is nearly frightened to death by it. On another occasion, you and your friend Foy Walker make a life-size skeleton and frighten passers-by in the Haywood Street area with it. Later, when you have your own motor car, you keep a pair of skates in the trunk, often showing them tantalizingly to Sister Alice, because she loved to skate. But you never would let her use them. As a youngster, your practical joking isn't the only thing that gets you into serious trouble. A bicycle does it once when you somehow get in front of Dick's laundry truck at 5 Points on Lee Street. You recall that?
At Columbia Laundry, boy. Columbia.
Tell us what happened, can you?
They ran over me.
You would have been seriously injured, according to witnesses, but a well-known educator, who later gave 2 schools her name, was standing nearby and administered first aid. Another troublemaker for you is your rapidly developing wit. An Ohio uncle comments on the size of your ears, and you reply, you tell him, no wonder, I can see I'm kin to a mule. At which your uncle becomes furiously angry. As a well-experienced pastor, you are to develop quite a reputation as a cook and connoisseur of beefsteak. But even as a boy, you learn to trap and cook what is considered by the children of the home and neighborhood to be a delicacy. Do you remember what it was? Tell us.
Do I have to tell
us? It's right here if you don't. Tell us.
Do you have? Go ahead, Jim.
Small birds he cooked. How is it done? How'd you cook them?
Well done.
Time passes, Bob McCluskey, and you are a young man. You get a job as a trip boy or errand boy for Johnson's Grocery on Gregory Street. The independence afforded by working appeals to you, and perhaps the discipline of your Irish family plays its part. At any rate, you quit school at age 14. You quit church as well, and you become a trip boy for W.H. Fisher, printer and founder of Fisher Harrison Printing Company. It is a decision which has a major impact on your life. Uncommonly ambitious, you learn all you can about the printing business. And as a teenager, you find yourself working up to increasingly skilled jobs under Mr. Fisher's watchful eye. You develop an intense fascination with words of the English language. Although your formal education has been cut short, you somehow see in the knowledge and skillful use of the language the handles to doors most men discover much later in life, and many not at all. You thumb incessantly through a dictionary, the essential tool of the typesetter, while others of your trade pick it up only as a last resort to learn where to divide a word at the end of a line of type. Perhaps the first practical use you make of your rapidly developing knowledge of the language is in the practice of the romanticist. Your linguistic skills fascinates the ladies, and coupled with your handsome physique and sharp wit, they give you an edge over the other young men of the day and allow you to call the shots almost at will. You early develop an unusual ingenuity. Once when a neighbor girl showed too little interest in you and your pal Jesse Kidd, and in fact wouldn't even speak to you, you and Jess, so we're told, don't deny it, you and Jess obtained 24 rotten eggs and carefully placed them on and around her house, from an appropriate distance, of course. Your capacity to love people deeply, first recognizable in your relationship with your younger brother Bill, also manifests itself in your relationship with the eligible ladies. But your skill in breaking off a romantic relationship matches your skill at starting one. Once you break up with a girl while walking her home in the snow. So final is your decision that you stop off at your house, which is on the way to hers, and leave the unfortunate lady to walk the rest of the trip alone.
If you could go back and find the old desk that I sat at years ago, you perhaps would find the initials of the girl that I was enamored with at that particular moment. I shouldn't have cut it in. I should have written it on one of these disappearing cellophane writing pads I have today. Write it, pull it, and it's gone. That's the way my affections were.
What did he say?
As your charm and wit and way with words continue to serve you well, so does your physical appearance. Naturally handsome, you develop an intense interest in the activities of the sports arena. You listen to early day radio sets and read the newspapers to keep up with the activities of the professional prize fighters. Men like Jack Dempsey, Jess Willard, and Jack Johnson. And you never miss a wrestling match at the Gymnasium Arena, just around the corner from W.H. Fisher's print shop. You watch middleweight champion Joe Turner and his contemporaries there, and you spend many hours in the ring yourself, until one day another wrestler beats you so badly you decide the printing trade is safer, if less lucrative. You were about 18 years of age when another significant event in your life occurs. You and 3 friends are on a motor trip. You are driving through Hagerstown, Maryland, when you come upon an automobile accident. You remember the scene? We know you do. On the pavement lay one victim, already dead. Nearby lay another, crying and praying to God. On the same trip, your automobile brakes give out on the twisting mountain roads. And you make a promise to God. You told it to us Wednesday night. Repeat it, would you? What your promise to God was.
Go ahead, Jim.
You promise God to give your life if He will only get you safely home. You don't keep your word right away, though, do you, Bob? But the next year, the Reverend Seth C. Rees holds a revival meeting for this church and the student body of the Greensboro Bible and Literary School. 26 years before, this same evangelist had spawned the church through a tent revival in Greensboro. For some reason, you decide to stand up a blind date downtown, and you show up outside the church. A Bible school student invites you to the altar. You decline, but suggest an alternative. What was it?
We pray outside.
At that place of prayer, there was a wonderful conversion. Although the men's dormitory passes with time, you hallow the spot on the ground over which you knelt that night. And for the next half-century, you visit that spot many times to give thanks to God for His unmerited salvation. Shortly afterward, your pastor is out of town when prayer meeting time comes, and someone asks you to speak for the service. You protest, being unprepared and unaccustomed to public speaking, but the party persuades you, and you agree. And when you begin your talk, you are amazed to discover that years of informational input are on the tip of your tongue. You feel that in that hour you received a gift of unlimited recall of thoughts and ideas. When you begin to speak to the congregation, you are amazed to discover that everything you have ever read and heard seems on the tip of your tongue, merely awaiting your permission to burst forth and express your thoughts and ideas. Even today, the sudden discovery of that gift in that midweek prayer service continues to amaze you. 3 months after your conversion, you give notice to Mr. Fisher that you are quitting the printing business. And his reaction? He offers you more money, but to no avail. He asks you how much you'd been offered to preach. And he's speechless when you tell him that you have been offered absolutely nothing. As your father had before, you enrolled in Greensboro Bible and Literary School as a ministerial student. But the wheels of formal education turn so slowly, and the desire to preach the gospel burns so brightly inside you, that you drop out of school after the first year, and without even a high school education, become a full-time evangelist. In fact, you have serious questions about the benefits of formal seminary training for the evangelist, and you express it in one of your early messages.
You want to see one of God's full-orbed, divinely commissioned preachers? Don't spot a little ossified, sissified dude running across a seminary campus, spouting a lot of unscientific nonsense about his zoological ancestry. A sweet little intellectual who knows as much about divinity as a tadpole knows about Einstein's theory of relativity.
Now, we felt this was so choice. The committee has handed me an impossible situation. They want me to repeat what you just heard. If you didn't get it, here it is, I think. If you want to see one of God's full-orbed, divinely commissioned preachers, don't spot a little ossified, sissified dude strutting across the seminary campus spouting a lot of unscientific nonsense about his zoological ancestry. A cute little intellectual who knows as much about divinity as a tadpole knows about Einstein's theory of relativity. That's what he said. Your tremendous vocabulary, your magnetic personality, and your ability to express yourself, your burning desire to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, all combine to give you a forceful delivery, and you find yourself in tremendous demand as a revivalist. Your district superintendent at the time, the Reverend W.A. Way, remembers.
He was very eloquent and was quite a preacher even when we just started out.
If formal education seemed relatively unimportant to you at that time, so too did the formality of applying for and receiving a license to preach. Mr. Way remembers that problem as well.
And I was sure that Bob was called to preach, and he was preaching, so I kept talking to him about some local license that the church could give, and I would approve it. But he didn't encourage me, and but I found that he should have them. I think the church should recognize a call and a gift in any young man and encourage him to preach if it's a call to preach. So I took his name before the board, and they gladly consented to give him, in unanimous way, give him license. So it was my privilege to take to him his first local license.
Your first year on the revival trail, you were only 21 years of age. Salvation Army Captain Brasher, whose widow will later be a faithful member of your congregation and Sunday school staff for years, invites you to preach in the Salvation Army Hall of Shamokin, Pennsylvania. Letha Durr Hickman, whose father's hands rest on your and Captain Brasher's shoulders in this photograph, recalls in a letter the impression you made on the people of Shamokin. Robert first came to Shamokin in 1926, she writes. My father went to hear him and influenced other members of the gospel crew and some businessmen to go hear this young firebrand. They liked what they heard and invited him to speak at some tent meetings the following year. It was during one of these meetings, Bob, that you find yourself in a service attacked by a case of spiritual rigor mortis. The service is dead, nothing is moving, and it appears nothing will. The situation calls for a bit of ingenuity. So, in an effort to relieve the depressed conditions, what tactical maneuver do you employ? Tell us.
Who dug that up?
Tell us what you did.
What did I do?
What did you do?
I got things moving.
You did. He kicked a folding chair right off the platform. After 2 years on the road, you decide to return to school. You enroll in Frankfurt Theological Seminary at Frankfurt, Indiana. Your reputation as a preacher orator has spread and you easily land jobs as a student pastor in Forest, Indiana, and as a visiting minister and evangelist. You bring to the Frankfurt campus such innate good looks and such gregarious personality that Bob somebody from North Carolina becomes the talk of the campus co-eds, even before many of them ever see you. One of those is a beautiful young local girl by the name of Neoma Ruth Hannah.
I had this experience of staying in the library after school. Some of the dorm girls were there, and we were talking over the day's events. It was right at the beginning of the year. And they were saying, two fellows came from North Carolina today, James Stone and Bob somebody. And all the girls were just falling for this Bob. So I sat up straight in my chair and I said, I'd never make a fool of myself over it. And about that time the door opens, and in walks this fella. Then he strides like he owns the world, or most of it. And he didn't say anything until he got right in front of the chair where I sat. But the fact that everything got so deathly quiet made me know this is the fella we've been discussing. And he said, where have you been all my life? And I was so embarrassed. I couldn't think of anything to say while I felt my face get redder and redder, and I just said, well, I was here before you were. And then his face began to get red, and he turned on his heel and he strode out of that place. And for a year, I'd go around the building to keep from moving.
This Bob somebody becomes interested in another girl and sees her regularly for the rest of that year. Although you and Bob's girlfriend aren't particularly close friends, Naomi, you do have an occasion to discuss him, don't you? And when she tells you she thinks you will win Robert away from her, what did you think and what did you say? Can you remember? No response. The next year, Bob's girlfriend doesn't return to Frankfurt because her family has moved to faraway West Virginia. But you miss her, Bob, so you visit her at Christmas. And you learn that she wants a dog. So you give her one. And do you remember what she names that dog?
Sonny Boy.
Boy, this is getting to be doggy, isn't it?
When school reconvenes following Christmas vacation, you give up on your West Virginia sweetheart. You have learned that the beautiful girl from Frankfort is the daughter of refined theological parents, both of whom hold college degrees and are ordained ministers. All of the Hannah children except one are to obtain at least one college degree, and some more than one. You decide to try again for Naomi Hannah's attention.
One rainy day, I remember the black slicker raincoats we wore, and I heard somebody swishing along, near me as I walked to the administration building for class. And then a voice, and he handed me this legal-size envelope, and he said, "I'm going to give you this if you make me 2 promises. That you won't tell anybody about it, and that you'll return it to me after you've read it." And I said, all right, I would. So in this, he had all this acrostic of my name, N for nobility, and A for affability, and O for originality, and M for modesty, and I for intellectuality.
You become fast friends, and your first date is arranged for graduation time. But you, Naomi, run into a bit of trouble. A long-forgotten boyfriend shows up to claim the fruits of a promise you had made years earlier. What was that promise? We have it, we think. When you were 16, he had asked you to marry him. And you had offhandedly told him to see you after graduation, when I may as well marry you as anybody. Bob is forced to try 3 times before you decide to spurn your Ohio visitor and follow through with your first date. That date is a classic. It includes romantically sipping soda through the same straw at the Ariel Inn in Frankfort. It begins at 9 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m. To ensure against future problems of that sort, Bob, you hire Naomi's brother, Nate, to keep an eye on things during the next couple of years, while you continue your schooling and preaching. Nate describes the situation in a letter. He writes, "Bob was courting Naomi and had a couple of competitors. Somehow he won my confidence, and with some sweet talk and a nickel, I would keep him informed of what I knew about the competition. I would also deliver love notes at the strategic moments, and on special occasions, flowers were added." Things work out for you, Bob and Naomi, and you chose your mutual birthday, September 4th, for your wedding. The bride's father performs the ceremony. You take a working honeymoon to Cuba and the British West Indies, where you preach in a string of missionary churches. While you were there, you receive a letter from your mother in Greensboro stating matter-of-factly that your church home is without a pastor. The news prompts an interesting remark from you, and Naomi remembers it well.
And he said, Naomi, even God himself couldn't handle those people.
When your Caribbean tour is over, you bring your bride home to Greensboro for a few days before continuing on your heavily booked evangelistic tour. But you discover a strange thing. There have been some cancellations.
And the next thing we knew when we came back, somehow his slate of evangelistic meetings had just disappeared.
At the same time, Bob, the local church board asks you if you will fill their pulpit temporarily until conference convenes a few months later. And you agree. So at age 27, Bob McCluskey, you begin your first pastorate. It is May of 1933. Neither you nor your bride can know what you are beginning your life's work. Only God can know the tremendous ministry that lies ahead. Notwithstanding your earlier feeling that the Lord himself might have difficulty with the Greensboro First Church, you throw yourself into the task. During those first few weeks, you attempt to patch up a deep split that has nearly choked the church to death.
They did not send me to a church that was on top of the world at that time. And I had the very fine privilege of feeding a church with a medicine dropper because she was sick nigh unto death.
You preach again and again on the need of unity, telling your small congregation on one occasion, "My father is on one side of this issue and my mother is on the other, but I'm on the Lord's side." About 75 people are attending the church, and you are forced to return to the printing trade on a part-time basis to supplement your meager salary. You long to see growth in the church, but you feel your first job is to overcome the differences that divide your people. Your approach begins to show progress. So within a few months, you piece together a men's Sunday school class. You start with 12, promising them to move out of the musty church basement as soon as they hit 100. Within weeks, you move. So well does your class respond to your leadership, Bob, that attendance remains above 100 for years, and at times you teach 300 men. Your wife, who has majored in public speaking in college, takes a woman's class about the same time and had similar success, and she remains its teacher to this day. Your part-time job proves to be an unexpected advantage to a young pastor. You have complete access to some of the finest printing facilities of the day, and soon printed materials with your church's name and address on it are showing up all over town. Your own home, Bob and Naomi, is soon blessed with your first daughter, Patricia.
I called her Alpha and Omega, first and last. But that last had to be superfluous, so I had to drop that off of the name.
Your second daughter, June, arrives 2 years later, and you are the parents of 2 lovely daughters. Children have always had a special place in your heart, Bob McCluskey. Even before you were married, when you were on the revival circuit, children flocked to you as they had done to the Master a long time ago. So strong is your affection for children that you later established the practice of leaving your office and desk unlocked so youngsters of the church can find candy and chewing gum you always keep squirreled away just for them. In fact, not only do you ensure the supply is adequate, but you personally try to press one more piece of sweets into their already overloaded hands, as if trying to practice what you often preach about the Savior's inexhaustible provisions for every need. Recipients of this generosity want to say a word of gratitude.
Look who's here.
If we have some more out there, they're supposed to be up here. Let's see them come too, because we're putting all this together. Chris, come on, Chris. Maybe they can hear you.
I may not be so large, I may not be so bright, but when it comes to math, here's one problem I feel you're just right. Take one sincere young boy filled with God's divine love. Add this to a congregation multiplied by light from above. Subtract all evil intentions, divide a lifetime of spreading joy. Your answer always comes out the same. Robert McCluskey, plus 40 years, still our boy. for us. He gives us candy. He gives us candy. He gives us candy out of his candy drawer. He tells about Jesus. He tells about Jesus. He tells about Jesus and how he loves us too. We love someone, this we know. Now we wish to tell him so. We love him and he loves us. You can guess it's Preacher McCluskey.
Let's stand right here, Deanne, now. Now, don't hold that. Now, you say yours. Stand right there, like that.
My mommy calls him Reverend. My daddy calls him Bob. And I heard Grandma say he's our shepherd. I'm just glad to be a lamb, the glorious flock. I can tell the shepherd he loves his sheep a heap a lot. I'll be just like my daddy and make nothing to do but throw my arms around his neck and say, Preacher Bob, I love you. I can give him the most
Yeah, we don't get all of it.
Now, we have to do something extra.
I want to do it.
As they say, Preacher Bob gives out candy. So we didn't want his supply to get too low, so we're going to give him a big bag of candy to put back in that candy drawer. You hand that to Preacher Bob.
Thank you.
Close the tickers. Some Preacher Bob.
Let's wait till later, because you'll have my leave now.
Some Preacher Bob.
There's some.
You get some money. She's still My turn.
Your turn.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, Justin, come on now. You can let him do now. Okay, Judith, you ready?
Okay.
That's it. Come on, Wally. You and Stuart.
What'd you make him take?
The children are not the only ones who want to express their sentiments. Many people have contributed to the presentation of this program tonight by supplying humorous and serious incidences, pictures, personal testimonies, and letters. We have preserved these letters, two of which are from Senator Helms, Congressman Mizell, and it is a pleasure to present them to you as a memento of this occasion. I have in my hands two telegrams I shall read at this time, just received. This is to express on behalf of all the citizens of Greensboro heartfelt appreciation for your 40 years of service to this community. Greensboro is a much better place today because of your dedicated ministry. Jim Melvin, Mayor. Congratulations, Reverend McCluskey, on your 40th anniversary at Christ Wesleyan. I want to join your many friends and admirers throughout Greensboro and your parish in saluting you for all you have done and meant to us. You are our inspiration, and we are grateful that our community has been blessed by your leadership and good works. Best wishes, Richardson Pryor, Member of Congress. During those early days in Greensboro, Bob and Naomi, your church at Silver Avenue and Union Street continues to share a campus with the Greensboro Bible and Literary School. Always the romantic, you symbolize with other struggling young lovers. One such instance occurs when the Reverend Jim Green is president of the school. His daughter Ruth is sweet on one of the preacher boy students. In responding to a plea by the young man involved, Bob, you go to Mr. Green's home. Choosing your words carefully so as to avoid a technical lie, you tell him somebody wants to see Ruth at the phone. Ruth rushes to the parsonage to answer the phone, but she hears only the dial tone. Then her boyfriend steps from hiding in your room, in your home. You later tie the knot for Bill and Ruth Armstrong. While you do all you can to help the Armstrongs to the altar, you appear less dedicated to the interest of Harry Brown and Kathleen Schuler. What happened? You completely forget their wedding, which you had promised to perform. Harry and Kathleen. Come. They're supposed to tell the congregation.
I don't want to come out here. You
come and tell that interesting episode, if you will, please.
Some 28 years ago and 21 days, we were to be married at the home of Mr. and Miss Bynum P. Langley, if you remember.
Right.
And the pastor didn't show up. So somebody had to go call him. Of course, he was real busy in the basement of the church painting. So a wedding was delayed about a half an hour, but he made it. So we're still here and still together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize. Thank you. Have you a word? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Harry and Kathleen, for coming tonight and sharing this bit of insight into our pastor with us. We appreciate it. In less than a decade, your ministry has reached far beyond the walls of your own church building. Not only are thousands of your congregation indebted to you for your help through troubled waters, but you become known as a man who can get hold of the throne of God for an outsider as well. One person who remembers such a case is Miss Jean DeBow. Miss DeBow's father had quite a reputation for his feelings about preachers, didn't he, Miss DeBow? Miss McCluskey's ministry played a part in your life, too, didn't it, Miss DeBow?
Yes, it did. I remember my mother had a stroke, and they were both sick in the bed. And one day I came home from work, and of course my father had absolutely no use for preachers, priests, or anything like that. They never got inside the door. Some of you may remember Mr. Sam Nelson. He tried to come to visit, but he never got in. And I come home from work one day, and my father said to me, Mrs. Staley's minister came to see us today, and he prayed for us. And I said, oh, that's nice. I never let on that I was kind of surprised that he even got inside of the door. Now, I don't know whether Brother Bob knew that my father might have kicked him out. I don't know. But he used to raise his cane and shout and yell to the top of his lungs, get out, in no uncertain terms. But somehow or other, Brother Bob got in there and prayed, and my father told me about it that night. And I said, well, that was very nice. And I said, it was very nice of him to come. And he says, well, it didn't do a bit of harm. And so I knew better than to say, how come you let him in? I didn't say anything about that. I just said it was nice. And but you know, from that day on, he got in with the preachers. And some of you may remember Brother Raymond Browning. He was a frequent visitor. He was district superintendent of the Nazarene Church, and he was a frequent visitor at that time. And so every time he came to town, he came to our house for dinner. And a young Nazarene minister got to coming. But Brother Bob was the first minister that had nerve enough to walk in that house and not be afraid to get kicked out or shot down or something. But I always appreciated that. Of course, Brother Bob was there for the funerals, too. And then there was another time when my kitty died. I thought so much of Napoleon. I'd had him for 14 years, and he was the last of the family. My mother and father had been buried. He would go with me to the cemetery every Sunday afternoon when we put flowers, and he never made a mistake. He never went to the wrong grave, and it meant so much to me. Well, of course, when anything would happen, I would call Sister Naomi. And I told her, oh, Naomi, I said, I think Napoleon is dying. So right away, Brother Bob arrived, just like it was a regular member of the family. He was there. And, well, Napoleon did die, and I was heartbroken. Well, Brother Bob brought him home here to the parsonage, which was next door to the church at that time. And he made a little coffin out of a crepe. And Sister Naomi, bless her heart, she lined that with a little pink satin. You know, that silver blue fur looked so pretty, and he had a heart spell, and so, you know, his fur wasn't deteriorated in any way, and he really looked so pretty. And so Brother Bob sealed the coffin and dug the grave and buried the kitty right next to Sister Naomi's little bird, and between the church and the parsonage. And we put suitable flowers on there. Well, I always remembered that, and I always appreciated it. And Sister Naomi wasn't satisfied with that. They got the cat buried all right. She wasn't satisfied with that, and she thought I ought to have some warm soup before I went home, so that that would sort of help me a little bit. And with our prayers and everything, that's only 2 cases that I was asked to mention about. But there are so many times that they have been such staunch friends and have been so kind, and I couldn't speak of all those times. I haven't forgotten any of them, but I only have 2 minutes. I think my time must be up.
Thank you, Mr. Bowe. The calendar trips into the 1940s. For you, Bob McCluskey, it means the busiest time of your career is ahead. War rages in Europe, and there is scant chance the United States can avoid becoming engaged in it. Already the armed forces have been beefed up. Arms are being stockpiled, and apprehension is high. Men are thinking seriously about life and death. And in fact, Bob, the war does come, and it snatches away some of your congregation. People no longer depend only on their newspaper to keep them abreast of developments overseas. Millions are listening to radio like never before. A young man named Ralph Lambeth is about to start a new radio station in Greensboro. You approach him about a weekly radio program. To your surprise, he donates 15 minutes each Sunday morning, and the little pulpit of the air is born the first Sunday WGBG is on the air.
You are in tune with WGBG in Greensboro, North Carolina. The time is 8:45. little pulpit of the air, radio presentation of the McCluskey Bible class featuring the Crouse chorus and your friend and our friend, Robert I. McCluskey.
The radio ministry is an immediate success. Thousands of Piedmont, North Carolinians who have never heard of Robert Irving McCluskey or the First Pilgrim Holiness Church make the little pulpit their regular Sunday morning fare.
Of God and might enter into the city. I believe and shall continue to believe that the terrific battering that Jesus Christ took from the deep shades of Gethsemane until his gashed and gory body was laid away in Jews of rock-bound tomb was punishment deserved by me and everybody. Listen, my friend, I believe and shall continue to believe that if either or both of us fail to appropriate this meritorious and sacrificial death to a faith born of genuine repentance, we shall perish well without end.
The program is produced live from the WGBG studios. Only one message out of 780 over the next 15 years is taped ahead of time.
This, we are dead. Justice has demanded life, and life has been given, the life of Jesus Christ, and justice has no more claim on us. Why? Because we find that the old-fashioned substitutionary doctrine of the atonement is clearly taught in the Bible, and it's the only way out for man who has sinned and come short of the glory of God. So, friend, when judgment fires begin licking around this old earth, searching for sinners, there will be only one safe place, and that is the place called Calvary, a place where judgment spent itself some 2,000 years ago, out there where the Son of God paid the debt for sins and signed the bill of ransom for all who believe in this old-fashioned doctrine of substitutionary atonement. Well, another Sunday morning, friend, has marked its space out. It's gone. I say good morning and God bless you, everyone, as I return you to my friend and to your announcer, Kurt Wellman.
During your years of going and getting them, Bob, you develop a special place in your heart for the down and outer, the man down on his luck, the professional bum, the derelict.
He had a special feeling for the alcoholic. He said to them, if they can just stay sober enough to come one more Sunday, I'll have another chance to tell them.
You see scores of lives literally ruined by what you term that elixir of damnation, and you develop an uncompromising hatred for alcoholic beverages. When the city of Greensboro schedules a vote for June of 1950 on the question of ABC stores, the Greensboro Ministerial Association promotes you as its speechmaker on the subject. Lloyd Gallimore remembers that liquor fight well, and remembers your classic comment when you feel the Greensboro News Company takes side in the controversy.
Preacher, when the barley corn situation was going on, your comment relative to the wet sheet said that the Greensboro Daily News was so wet that you could wring enough water to wash your face.
Thank you, Lloyd. The liquor controversy, no doubt, is partially responsible for a significant event in the city's history which occurs the following year. The new evangelist, Billy Graham, schedules a crusade in Greensboro, and your church contributes a disproportionate share of the leadership. Building contractor Lloyd Gallimore constructs the huge tabernacle for the meetings, since the city has no buildings large enough. And you, Bob, are named director of counselor training. The crusade is a significant event for Christianity in Greensboro. The tempo of that fall reminds you of your own evangelistic tent meetings years earlier. In 1952, you are en route to a cattle sale near Elkin with Lloyd and Ardith Gallimore. When the conversation turns to the Holy Land, you remark casually that you would love to be joining a group which is scheduled to visit the Middle East that fall. Almost as casually, Mrs. Gallimore makes you an offer that you can't refuse. You remember what it is?
Yeah, I told her something like this. I believe she said if I'd make her my campaign manager, she would see that the finances were secured. And immediately, I made her my campaign manager.
It was a deal. And at 2:30 a.m., on a summer morning, a large crowd of your congregation turns out to see you board a train for New York, where you catch an airplane for the most memorable trip of your life. Later, you confide that the interest of your people meeting to see you off in the middle of the night provoked such emotion inside you that you cry all the way to Danville.
It was just reasonable.
As the 1950s are upon you, your pace quickens. You help establish the first Youth for Christ in Greensboro. You serve on the board of directors of the Greensboro Community Center. You fill speaking engagements throughout the area. Your radio program enjoys immense popularity. How much more can a man do? Suddenly, on a Sunday morning in 1956, your world comes crashing down around you. Almost in a moment, your tremendous energy vanishes. I was tired way down inside, you are to say later. The little pulpit of the air misses its first Sunday since it began 15 years before and is never broadcast again. Your doctor sends you to bed for 4 weeks at a brother's home away from the city and tells you to get up only to eat your meals. And you are broken-hearted. As you ponder your future and what will happen to your church, you confide in the son of one of your early Greensboro converts, Judd Foster.
Preacher Bob, I'd almost forgotten this conversation, but I was reminded about it a few days ago. I came over to your house and you confided into me that it looked like this was the end, and maybe in the future you'd have to find you a little country church, if you recall, that you could sit down and talk to the people as you had time and had the energy. I had the privilege of telling you that, in my opinion, God had something else for you, and that our church was country enough, and that we wanted you to stay around. I don't know whether that had anything to do with your staying, but since that time, I've noticed, and I think the congregation has noticed, that you do talk to us. And particularly on Wednesday night, if you have a chance to come to our Wednesday night service, Preacher Bob sort of takes us to the woodshed occasionally. He lets his hair down, he tells us where we're wrong, how to get straightened out, and he talks to us like a father talks to his children. I've appreciated it, and I'm glad that you decided to stay in this little country church rather than some other. Now, because I think you know that I'm your friend, I'm going to say one further thing. I take no credit for your staying if they will give me no blame for your staying, okay?
Judd, you're living dangerously. Although you decide to remain at your old job, you develop the habit of talking from the back of a bench, as you had considered doing to a small church, to your prayer meeting congregation. And Wednesday night does, indeed, become the favorite time of the week for many of your parishioners. The church board tries to take some of the load off your shoulders by employing an assistant pastor. And a series of associates subsequently sit at the feet of the great McCluskey, while at the same time help you spread the ministry of this unusual church further into the community. Your illness turns out to be brief. Your recovery is speedy, but not permanent. In 1959, a blood clot lodges somewhere in your body and hospitalizes you for 12 days. You're forced to leave the pulpit for several weeks. This time, when you resume your duties, you do so carefully. Your job takes on a new meaning. Your life, a more narrow and intense purpose. you read several theologians' response to the question, if you knew you had only one more sermon to preach, what would it be about? The question burns itself into your conscience so directly that you determine never again to preach but one message.
My ministry, and pardon this expression, has undergone a very drastic evolution. Recounting my early days, I was what they would call a hellfire and brimstone and damnation preacher. This is your last chance. God's going to leave you to go out the door. You know, all that stuff they use, high-pressure method. But you know, I finally got so fascinated with Jesus Christ, and I never thought I'd be a Jesus Christ preacher, that I regret I've ever spent a minute on the periphery.
That periphery, Robert Irving McCluskey, surrounds the basic message of the Savior who touched you as a young man and called you into his ministry. At times, we believe you have found expression in the words of Paul as he wrote, "But it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him." And for 40 years, you have preached the heart of that message faithfully, deliberately, consistently.
There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. We lift our hearts in praise. Without a doubt we'll know that we have been revived when we shall leave this place.
In that spirit, if you will stand, you may consider yourselves dismissed. Thank you for coming.